And a very good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me now in welcoming our guest of honor, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan. Welcome, Minister. Good morning once again, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Singapore International Cyber Week 2025. My name is Mike Tan. It is my honor to be your host this morning. And this morning we have three high-level panels on diplomacy. Panel 1 is titled Multilateral, Multipolar, Cyber Diplomacy in a Digital Age. Our second panel is titled A World Apart, The Pursuits of Interoperability. And our third panel is titled Making Consensus Work, the UN and the Future of International Cyber Cooperation. To open today's program, it is my great honor to invite Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, to deliver the opening address for the high-level panels on diplomacy for SICW 2025. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I believe this is the fourth day of the SICW. The cyberspace has become a borderless fabric that enables us to observe, to communicate, to mobilize, and to transact at scale and at a speed which is unprecedented. If you think about what happened on the streets around Singapore 2 weeks ago, we had the F1 race. And many people think of driving quickly as requiring a powerful engine. But I would add there are also other elements that are essential. You also need good brakes if you're going to drive quickly. You need a driver with quick reflexes. And another element which is often underestimated, in order to drive safely on the road or on the high seas or to fly in the air, you need a highway code. You need rules of the road in order to avoid collisions, in order to ensure safety, and in order for us to conduct all the essential activities. So, cybersecurity, in a sense, represents the brakes. It also, through its normative processes, in which this conference includes, is also a means for us to generate the norms, the rules, the codes needed for these activities to be conducted effectively and safely. I just want to make three quick points this morning. First point is that actually cybersecurity has become yet another domain of the global commons. Global commons refers to areas which, by definition, are beyond borders, by definition, issues and problems which are beyond the aegis of a single actor or single state to control or to deal with. And examples in history include, for instance, pandemics, climate change, social and political movements and developments in response to industrial revolutions, for instance, the welfare state, social security. And in a sense, because we are now in a technological age, this is yet another arena where the global commons and cybersecurity is one key burning issue. So that's the first point. It is an issue of the global commons. The second point is that we need a multilateral approach. And since the United Nations, in essence, reflects the apex multilateral body, it is essential that we recognize that there is a role for the UN, which is still the only organization that encompasses all state actors and increasingly also non-governmental organizations, and also a voice and a forum for civic discourse and for non-government organizations reflecting views from the broad spectrum of society. Singapore is very proud of the fact that our permanent representative to the UN, Mr. Berhan Ghaffar, chaired the open-ended work group from over the last 4 to 5 years. And it's amazing that even in these fractured times, the OEWG was able to land agreement by consensus. If you think about it, to achieve this at a time like what we are currently experiencing on global affairs is a major achievement. The agreements included developing a global points of contact directory, which serves essentially as an emergency hotline in the event of urgent ICT incidents. They were also able to adopt 8 global confidence building measures to enhance mutual transparency, understanding, and ultimately build a level of confidence that enables interoperability. Most importantly, we also agreed to establish a UN global mechanism on ICT security, which will continue our collective norm-building efforts in this domain. My third point is that recognizing that this is an issue of the global commons, recognizing a role for the UN is essential, but not sufficient, because we know that when problems arise, the states and the stakeholders who will be most at risk will be, by definition, those who are less equipped, with less infrastructure, with less capacity to deal with emergencies and problems as and when they arise. And that's why my third point is the essential need for capacity building. After all, cybersecurity is only as strong as its weakest link. And especially for small and developing states, the stakes are particularly high, as these emerging platform technologies threaten to widen the digital divide, increase vulnerabilities, and it is essential for small states to have access to capacity building programs, and that they have a voice on global fora, on developing digital governance, building cyber resilience against malicious actors, and access to the tools to effectively navigate the digital transformation. In a sense, actually, it's the old analogy of a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And it is in our collective interest to enhance the capacity of everyone, and in particular, focusing on the most vulnerable. So earlier this week, we announced the renewal of our UN Singapore Cyber Program, which is organized in collaboration with the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs. And the UN Singapore Cyber Fellowship has benefited 140 participants from 97 countries since its inception in 2022. And I hope that this will be the first of many capacity building programs. In February 2024, ASEAN member states agreed to establish the ASEAN Regional Computer Emergency Response Team, which will be funded and hosted by Singapore. It will enhance our collective ability to respond to cyber threats by coordinating these cybersecurity incident responses across all ASEAN member states. And these are practical measures to manage cyber incidents, and we hope it will also foster broader regional stability and trust, and in turn, turbocharge the economic and social contributions of these technologies in all ASEAN societies. Looking ahead, the accelerating advances in AI, quantum computing, the Internet of Things, will continue to dramatically reshape our landscape. And our governance frameworks must adapt. They must take a prospective view, and they must be capable of addressing today's threats and tomorrow's uncertainties. The frameworks we build today can mitigate the risks. It can promote cyberspace as a catalyst for human advancement and dignity. But these frameworks can only deliver lasting security when matched with political will and operational capability. Singapore remains steadfast in our belief that international cooperation, grounded in international law and guided by shared in emerging norms, offers the most practical path forward. So we commit to working closely with all our international partners and stakeholders to advance these policy discussions, governance frameworks, and practical solutions that will preserve international peace and security in cyberspace. So I look forward to the discussions, and I hope we'll have some robust set of questions in the session to follow. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that insightful address. May I request, Minister, to please take your seat on stage while I introduce our first panel titled Multilateral, Multipolar, Cyber Diplomacy in a Digital Age, the rapid spread and adoption of transboundary digital technologies, and the policy, legislative, and diplomatic pressures on states to keep pace with them have strained the basis of state power, and at the same time, state-state relations that underpin the existing multilateral framework. This panel aims to consider how cyber diplomacy should adapt in order to stay relevant and effectively govern a borderless global cyberspace, while ensuring that all voices, big and small, are heard. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together as we invite your moderator, Dr. Shashi Jayakumar, Executive Director, SJK Geostrategic Advisory. And also put your hands together for your panelists, Mr. Jiří Kozák, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Ms. Helen Pop, Ambassador at Large for Cyber Diplomacy, Estonia, Mr. Ernst Norman, Ambassador at Large for Cyber Affairs, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and Mr. Nicholas Butts, Director of Global AI and Cybersecurity Policy, Microsoft. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel.
Congratulations with the Singapore side.
Over to you, Dr. Jayakumar.
Thanks very much. I was thinking about the way Minister Balakrishnan framed the issues in terms of current trend lines, capacity building, and also issues with multilateral frameworks and the global commons. These have been key. These have been key to, I think, understanding Singapore's approach, and indeed dipping in and dipping out of the conference sessions yesterday. I think these themes make repeated appearances in some of the discussions. So let me frame these and interleave these with just one or two very brief moderator remarks I'd like to make by way of setting the stage for what I hope will be a good discussion. The frameworks that have been built for multilateral cooperation and capability building are fairly well known, but these were done in an age where geography defined power and responsibility. But today, things are a little bit different, I think it's safe to say. We're entering an age and an era where multilateral corporations, private companies, hold a great deal of power. And some of you might agree that the power that they wield approximates a level which was once reserved by governments. So I want to talk about that because these are, to some degree, strains as well. They strain the multilateral cooperation that we were talking about, and they raise the crucial question, how can we renew, refresh, and reinvigorate the global commons that Minister Balakrishnan has been talking about, in a world which, as you've just heard, is increasingly borderless, increasingly contested. So I want to explore the pathways in the time that we have, exploring the legislative and diplomatic gaps that we have. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Balakrishnan. You've given us a very lucid explanation as to how Singapore sees the world and the role that Singapore has played in fostering the global commons. But if I could step even further back in really overall perspective, if you were a cynic, if I were a cynic, I can assure you I'm not, but if I were, I would simply say, okay, hold on, that's great, but we are in an era where technology threatens sovereignty, jurisdiction, and consensus-based cooperation. So cynically speaking, or rather uncharitably, despite all that's been done, the talk, OEWG, GGE as well, ASEAN ministers earlier on coming to a consensus on non-binding norms, as unpalatable as it might seem, could someone say that multilateralism has reached the natural limits of these spheres under discussion? I'm sure the answer is no, but cynically speaking, you have almost a Thucydidean worldview where might equals right, and the powerful nations, powerful in cyber, simply do as they wish under the veneer, the cloak of plausible deniability. So given that sort of a cynical counterpoint, how would you say we should still try to take the discussion and the mechanisms forward?
Well, first, I wouldn't call that cynical. I think you need a healthy dose of realism. Let's think back about the past industrial revolution. And I guess for this audience here to persuade you that cyber technologies, AI, quantum, is possibly at least equal in force to the Industrial Revolution. First point. Second point, what happened as far as sovereignty as a result of the Industrial Revolution? And it basically, Europe and ultimately America, which is the ultimate heir of the Industrial Revolution, was able to colonize, was able to establish empires, which spanned the globe. Second point. The third point, domestically, is the Industrial Revolution also upended social and political organizations. You've got capitalism, you've got the reaction, socialism or communism, you've got trade unions developing, you've got the welfare state. The fourth point, Industrial Revolution in its early phases was also the Gilded Age, an age of great inequality, because if you got it first, you had a head start. Where did this lead us in the first half of the 20th century? 2 world wars, the breakup of empires, independence, post-colonialism. You see, the point here is the last 80 years characterized by a rules-based world order, multilateralism, recognizing that if we wanted to avoid neo-colonization, world wars, and you in fact wanted to get past the Gilded Age and raise a middle class with access to technology and the means of production, given that these are new means of production. My point is, if we can do that, then a multilateral approach, recognizing that this is a platform technology in the global commons, and that raising and distributing capacity to use these new tools, in fact, becomes all the more essential. So that's the frame I wanted to leave with you.
None of us have a crystal ball, obviously, and in some of these global mechanisms, not just the new permanent mechanism, but also cybercrime convention and new mechanisms for AI governance, in fact, more than one at the UN. level. None of us have a crystal ball, but if you were to cast your eye forward, given that these interleave with each other, AI, cybercrime, cyber discussions, what over the medium term might constitute success over the medium term? And of course, I'd like to then throw open that question to any other speaker who might care to comment.
I think the question was for you.
The question of AI on war and peace and diplomacy is one which is fascinating. If you think about it, in both diplomacy, deterrence, and war, you actually need a theory of mind. Who is your counterpoint? Who is your adversary? Who is your partner? What is his or her frame of the world? What are his or her fears and hopes? And how do I elicit either agreement or acceptance or a new common understanding? AI potentially changes that, because am I now dealing with a human being, a human mind, with all its inhibitory circuits and all its inbuilt preferences, fears, and anxieties? Or am I dealing with a statistical calculating machine? What does mutually assured destruction mean in such an arena? How do you get the consensus? How do you get agreement? How do you work with one another? So that's one big level which I'm deeply concerned with. I worry about not just AI is a nuclear weapon, but at the highest level, how will leaders engage with one another? How will strategic decisions be made?
Thanks very much. I think Ambassador Norman first, and then Nicholas.
Well, thank you very much. And as it's the first time in a panel, I want to thank Minister, but especially also David Coe with his team for this excellent conference and the opportunity to have these exchanges. It's my third time here, and again, it's a wonderful conference. I was really happy also with your support for the multilateral system, because actually that's our angle as well. We see threats coming from all sides. You mentioned already the rule-based orders, discussions on the position of the UN, the increasing innovation. I will touch on AI. And you see also the position of the big tech companies. The value of big tech is often multiple the value of GDPs, even our GDP of the Netherlands or from Singapore. If you look at NVIDIA, what their worth is, or Microsoft, it's incredible. So there are threats of different sides, but especially on cyber and digital domain, you see that the UN has been very successful. You mentioned already the result, the conclusion of Open Data Working Group, the Cybercrime Treaty, but also last year, the Pact of the Future with the Global Digital Compact. We are now discussing the future of the internet governance, WISS plus 20, which will be concluded hopefully in December. And it looks also very prosperous that we will get conclusion on that one. So we're able to reach conclusions on these domains. So it shows that everyone sees the importance of it, because it's one of the few domains we still advance and make steps. Of course, AI is a difficult topic, and that one, because we do not have consensus yet. At the same time, if you look at the military, we started together with South Korea, RE-AIM, the responsible AI, the military domain. And you saw that really got traction, that a lot of countries were involved and want to be involved in that discussion, because we all see it as a threat. And we are glad that Spain has taken over the baton and will organize it in February next year, the next conference on RE-AIM. And we also introduced, together with South Korea, another resolution on AI in the military domain. So, and you will see that the vast majority will vote in favor of that resolution. So that shows the awareness and the need internationally to come to consensus on that one. Still, there's a big discussion, of course, with the US, who doesn't want to regulate, and our side, and I think also Singapore, who needs to regulate. I mean, the minister made the comparison with the Formula One. Unfortunately, Max Verstappen didn't win, but got the second place the last time. But it's full with innovation. And it's always the cliche that the US innovates and Europe regulates. Look at the last WIPO report on innovation. 6 out of 10 countries in the top 10 are European. Switzerland is always leading as number 1 in innovation. Singapore is number 5, and the Netherlands is number 8. So innovation is strong also in Europe. So we have a say also on the governance of AI in a strong position. And we have to do that with all society, multi-stakeholder, because governments cannot do it alone. We have to do it together with NGOs, academia, and industry together.
Okay, I'm sorry the Dutch driver didn't win. Maybe his brakes were too good, yeah, possible. Nicholas, then Ambassador Tom.
Yeah. Thank you, and I apologize in advance for everyone for my voice. I wish I could say it's because of the amazing hosting that David and his team have done and too much karaoke, but really it's just because SICW has been too engaging and I've had too many conversations, so forgive me. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, David and CSA, for not just hosting CICW, but also the partnership that we have and continue to have. Microsoft recently moved our research lab here. We continue to have expanded partnership with CSA that we're very grateful of. And we continue to look forward to deepening that. I want to touch on 2 things. First, I think the minister raised this really important point about what AI changes. But I would also say what continues with AI. So we recently released Microsoft Digital Defense Report, came out last week, is our annual report that highlights what is the threat landscape looking like, what are we seeing at Microsoft. We, on a daily basis, process around 100 trillion telemetry signals across Microsoft platforms. On a given day, we will have scanned more than 5 billion emails for malware and for phishing. This is a critical point, but it's also just to give you a picture of the challenge that we face. And we do see attackers increasingly leverage AI for sophisticated spear phishing, increasing the scale and the volume of ransomware attacks. And we're also seeing a nation-state axis experimenting with AI to conduct information and cyber operations. The upside is we also are seeing defenders making use of AI. We have a huge challenge with open source OT vulnerabilities that create challenges for our critical infrastructure. AI is helping to address that. We see AI helping to address and identify vulnerabilities, remediate those, support incident reporting, and then being used by cybersecurity human teams to lower the admin burden. And so we continue to see more opportunity than risk on the AI space. On the governance point related to AI, I think it's important also to highlight that because of the challenges that the minister mentioned, that AI models are stochastic, what we need to do differently from what we've done so far in the digital ecosystem is we can't just look at networks and static infrastructure. AI models are moving so fast, they're developing so quickly that we need to look at capabilities. This is why Microsoft has launched our frontier governance framework, where we're actually the only company explicitly tracking before we release a model. And I know because I'm part of the team that's doing that and testing that for our models. Before we release those models, we test them for could they potentially be used maliciously by cyber actors. So we want to make sure that technology benefits defenders, not attackers. The upside, I will end on this, is from a governance perspective, AI is no different from the internet. It is still borderless. Many of the benefits that the minister touched upon, that Ernst mentioned already, of the benefits of the rule-based order that we built over the last 80-some years, they carry forward in AI. We still need multilateralism. It's more critical than ever. We still need to base anything that we do from a governance perspective on a strong base of norms and of trusts. And then finally, we need public-private partnerships more than ever. Because this technology is being developed by technology companies does not mean that it should only be regulated by those. And I think you will find that Microsoft have a very engaging approach on that. We do agree that it needs to be regulated. We need not less or more, but better regulation of AI.
Before I go on to Ambassador Tom, very briefly, Nick, because you did end on the point of partnerships.
Yeah.
So Minister Teo, Josephine Teo, has just announced, and this is been garnering some headlines, the ASEAN Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in Singapore, the collaboration with Microsoft. I believe the collaboration is on the use of AI for security, amongst other initiatives. Not so much on the pinpoint details, but if you could share whether you, in your view, see these types of collaborations as being essential going forward. You think we're going to see more on these kinds of things?
Exactly, and I think first of all, I can't take any credibility of it. I think it speaks to the role that Singapore plays and the role that CSA plays in terms of how global leadership in this space. We did the tabletop exercise in June. It was excellent. We released a report and signed the letters yesterday, and we actually agreed we were going to continue for the next 2 years. And I look forward to coming back next year, being part of that cybersecurity exercise. I wandered yesterday around the exhibit downstairs and talked to the startups and a couple of students actually over in Nanyang Polytech that were building a really cool new AI classifier model. That for me, I'm a nerd. I like that. So I went down and talked to the students, and they're doing brilliant things. And again, this just shows where the role of Singapore is. But from a Microsoft perspective, those are exactly the kind of partnerships we need. More threat intel sharing. We want to also share what we're seeing and what we see AI technology potentially being able to, but we need government partners. We really need government partners. We need government partners to make sure that we take action against cyber criminals, to make sure that we stem the threat of nation state sponsored actors. But we also need governments in the cyberspace for deterrence. We're a private company. We can help defend our customers and our partners. Microsoft is, at the end of the day, a private company. We need states.
Thanks very much. And then Ambassador Top, and then Deputy Minister Kozák.
Yes, maybe to build a little bit what the minister and Ernst were saying, the fact that we have 3 major UN agreements from past year is absolutely remarkable on cybercrime, on open-ended working group, and also the Global Digital Compact. It absolutely presents a positive signaling for multilateralism. But as we all know, consensus on process is often not the same as consensus on substance. Quite frankly, many of the underlying frictions were largely left unresolved, including how inclusive those processes should be and how to balance sovereignty with the global nature of the internet. So when it comes to the global mechanism, we absolutely have our work cut off, or we have a lot to do on this one. But maybe the other point that I also wanted to stress, as I personally spent considerable amount of time in UN basements, being part of both of the open-ended working group and the cybercrime convention negotiations, I often get this argument that well, we have all those agreements in place. We have agreed that international law applies. We have agreed on a list of norms that everyone should follow. But why do we still see malicious cyber activity? And why is the issue still growing? And my argument on this one is that yes, absolutely, there have been serious setbacks. But in recent years, we have seen one country in our neighborhood to breach also the UN Charter and the Geneva Convention. But I would still argue that does not take away the value of the UN Charter or the Geneva Conventions. Those agreements that we have made still matter. Nevertheless, we do need to recognize that political commitments might not be enough. One of the key areas we need to move forward together is ensuring that states face consequences for engaging in responsible behavior in cyberspace. For Estonia, the topic of accountability is extremely important. We need to create transparent and meaningful consequences for malicious actors in cyberspace. We need to be able to talk freely about the attacks that we are witnessing in our networks. And again, I think there is no better forum for that than the UN, where we have 193 countries behind the table. And this was one of my takeaways from the past 5 years in the open-ended working group, but that slowly but surely states started to speak up. on what they are seeing in the networks, and that's huge. The other part is the progress we made on international law. I think that's remarkable as well. When we started the open-ended working group, we had less than 30 countries that had put forward their national position on international law. 5 years later, the number was close to 100, which is also remarkable.
Well, Estonia's achievements in this field, international law, really, really remarkable, a model for us all, along with, of course, the Dutch. The time is ticking down. We have about 13 minutes left. Can I use this opportunity to remind the audience, this is your chance to interrogate our audience members using Slido. So please submit your audience questions. But Deputy Minister Kozák first, please.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to elaborate more on what Nicholas mentioned, maybe from a more broader philosophical perspective, the cooperation between state and private. In the past, there was something which was called the monopoly of power. It was sovereignty to the states. Of course, there were some private armies, but most of the power was in the hands of the states, and they were also responsible for the rules and for punishment of those who break it. In the past couple of years, the amount of power and wealth accumulated by private companies is so huge that they are also becoming important actors. And in the cyberspace, which has no borders, there is a need for close cooperation between private companies and states and international organizations. So we surely need to elaborate on this. We need to work on cooperation. When the rules are set, I think the private companies have to be involved, because without them we cannot do it. I very much liked the parallel made by a minister with Formula One. We surely need all the aspects that he has mentioned. Imagine a pilot which starts driving the opposite direction. He has good speed, he has good brakes, he has all the rules, but he doesn't follow them. Then somebody has to come in to make sure that this pilot is stopped and put in the right direction. Again, it will be states. But are the states in the era of AI, in the era of quantum, able to do it alone? No, they're not. They will need the companies. So the cooperation is really, really crucial. And for the rules, I think it is important that we have found a way how to communicate. The United Nations have an important role. The success of Singapore leading the open-ended working group, I think, shows that small states can do a lot. There was a lot of cooperation done, moderated by Singapore on within the UN. What we must not forget is to include the developing countries as well. They might not be advanced, they might not have the tools, but we need them to be on board, because in the future, if those countries are not involved, then it will be much harder for all of us to again put the law in power and to have everyone observe it.
That's very thought-provoking, Deputy Minister Kozák. Now, there have been a couple of questions flashed on the screens and on the Slido, and one of them has to do with the necessary evolutions of multilateral diplomacy. But if I could turn that and phrase it slightly differently, because I'm thinking of some things that Minister Josephine Teo has said in the past, and actually repeated by Ambassador Burhan on the first day. The reasons why the OEWG could, in some ways, be said to have succeeded is because it wasn't just like-minded people in the room. It wasn't just necessarily people who agree with each other. And I'm wondering whether you might have your own respective takes on this, particularly those kinds of discussions in especially fraught times, like you could say we have now. Discussions are not limited to our friends, but that necessarily means the discussions become quite heated or quite tense, because there are different worldviews here. How do these difficult conversations take place? We accept that some are behind the scenes. We accept we don't see some. But would you have thoughts on these kinds of difficult conversations, given all the kinds of people in the room? Maybe Ambassador Norman, would you like to have a go, and then anybody else? Sure. Yeah.
Well, maybe I can start off with, but I know my neighbor Helen has the a lot of experience sitting in many of these discussions. That's a unique part actually of the UN, that we all sit there and we have to talk together. It's no option to avoid each other. You have to find consensus, and that's the difficult part of the UN, but it's also the strong part of the UN. So that means also often, smaller groups meeting each other. Because if you only sit in a plenary room, you will not reach consensus, but you meet with smaller groups. The European Union was reaching out to many regional other groups. We met with the African Union, with the ASEAN, with Latin America, to discuss the different topics. And really to try to find consensus, and what is to understand and to listen to the other side, what is important for them in this discussion. What do they want to get out of it? And for instance, many countries on the open-end working group is capacity building, because everyone felt the threat, but everyone has the capacity to do it. It was actually, as the minister mentioned in his introduction work, I mean, cybersecurity is as strong as its weakest link, and that's worldwide. So it's also why the effort of the European Union and many of the member states is focusing really on capacity building, including also countries at the table. We had with a number of countries the Women in Cyber program, not only to encourage women to participate, and measurably successful because a majority of the interventions during the last meeting were from women, but also to include countries who were otherwise not at the table, because internet is for everyone, and they should be able to participate in discussions, and that makes also makes it stronger to reach consensus.
Yeah, thank you. Well, therefore, the takes on that question, Pastor Tom. Yeah.
Yes, just a quick note on this one. The discussions at the UN on those issues have been going on since 1998, so for a long, long time. At first, it was 15 countries, then 25. I was part of those negotiations, and I remember when the decision was made to move from 15 to 25, and there were several countries behind the table who said that that's not going to work, it's too many, we can't do it. And then we moved from 25 to 193. So it was a huge, huge leap. And when we started with the open-ended working group, we were very much in a listening mode at first. And the message that came through loud and clear from developing countries was, we need capacity building, we need more capacity building. And this is also the reason why Like-Minded proposed the program of action. The global mechanism as such, it has elements of program of action, but it's not one. It's not exactly the same, but this is the beauty of the UN. You need to compromise, you need to find the solutions, and I think what we ended up with is very much a vision that different countries and regions had. But of course, it's up to us to make it work. We still need to fill it with substance, and this is the work that is ongoing right now.
Thank you, Ambassador Tom. Did you?
I think the multilateral organizations are important because they are inclusive, and everybody should sit around the table. The problem is sitting around the table with somebody who doesn't want to observe the rules that are agreed by everybody. Even by those who don't want to observe them. This would be very cynical and at the same time frustrating, negotiating rules with somebody that doesn't want to stick to the rules afterwards. So we need inclusivity, but at the same time, we need understanding why those who are around the table, some of them, don't want to stick to the rules, don't want to play by the rules. So these discussions must really have a meaning, because it would be pointless to talk about the rules, setting the rules, and then having countries not observing them. This is very important.
At the end of what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that means you want accountability.
Yes, exactly. This is what we need. Those who are responsible have to be responsible. There has to be accountability, which is very hard, and we see it every day that the UN Charter is not observed by all the members. And again, cyber, it is about people. It's not about the machines. And if we don't stick to the rules, there is no point of negotiating the rules.
Right.
So we need to sit around the table, talk about the rules, have the rules observed, and have accountability at the end.
Right. I'm going to stick on the same tack. Who's at the table? And I'm not sure whether Nick might be interested in taking this one, and that's the role that multilateral national firms, including some of the biggest, what sort of precise role should they play in your view in terms of the next generation of multi-stakeholder discussions? It could be on the new governance mechanisms, or it could be even on bilateral sort of capacity building discussions. What's your view on that?
It's a great question. If I can just start with building on the points with on UN OEWG, we were part of those discussions for the past 5 years, very closely with both ambassadors. Colleagues have been working in the past 5 years on that. Same, by the way, for not just multilateral, but smaller convenings such as the Pall process, also on REAIM, also on the Roundtable for AI Security. So I feel Microsoft really is attempting to lean in to be part of those conversations, to lend our technical expertise on the technology, to lend our perspective. At the end of the day, for multilateral decisions, those are decisions for governments, not for companies. I do think, though, that we play a really critical advisory role in that. I will also say, for AI in particular, because the technology is moving so fast, we industry really need to play a leadership role in this. You'll see Microsoft issued our responsible AI principles a couple of years before there was anyone talking about AI regulation. We are trying to engage proactively with not just governments, but other industry players in things like the Frontier Model Forum, where we, with other leading AI providers, attempt to provide not just best practices, but share lessons learned around the technology, because we're at a stage now where it's not even technical standards that are guiding it. The innovation is moving so fast that we're pre-standard territory. And so companies like us really need to lean in, and I think we have that.
Thank you. I'm going to switch tack slightly, and this question is for Minister Balakrishnan. Minister, in your recent Straits Times interview, which was widely circulated and read, you enunciated some of the key principles. This is not just cyber, but key principles of our foreign policy. And you said, and I quote, "We must always have a hard-nosed, realistic view of the world. We are small, we are vulnerable," end quote. But I'm just thinking how this relates to cyber. You have cyber experts in the room and on the panel, people who are conversant, cyber matters to them. The other thing, which I think is very important in your Straits Times interview, is MFA and agencies spending a lot more time explaining foreign policy to the people, why this matters. Now, of course, issues like, let's say, cohesion, Gaza, US-China matters, can explain to the people. How should MFA and indeed agencies as a whole get better in evolve in explaining why cyber, which is kind of hard to grasp, almost ineffable, matters not just to us, we're converted, but to the actual people, why this affects them and their futures?
That's going to exceed the time. But let me first do a quick reaction to I've been watching the questions coming on Slido. Yeah. First thing is you need a universal inclusive process. And I think it was your point. And I'm very glad that for SICW, David invited not just friends, but people who are having active conflicts with one another. It's important for universal, inclusive process to be in place. Second point is consensus. Now, the purpose of pushing for consensus is to try to take as many considerations as possible on board. But there is also an abuse of consensus. And you know it when you get there into a room and you know that someone is just spoiling, disrupting, taking hostages. And the way we need to operate consensus then has to be intellectually get out beyond your comfort zone and try to incorporate people whose views may even be diametrically opposed to you, but not allow hostage taking. So multilateralism and the processes that we have organized and developed in the UN actually may need to modify so that you can deal with spoilers, but still take a broad-based approach. The third element which came through in the questions is this human, you're dealing with human weaknesses, greed, envy, fear, power, all the usual vices. The cyber equivalent is, there's this discipline in computers called the UX, the user experience, or the human-machine interface. And I can tell you from a surgical perspective, if the interface between human and system is not designed properly, that's when you're going to get spectacular errors. So we need to bear these concepts in mind. Universal participation, broad-based consensus without giving space to hostage taking, and paying attention to the human-machine interface. Now, addressing your question about what do we tell people, let me just give you a little snippet of the conversation I once asked President Obama. And we were talking about cybersecurity. I said, so what's the real issue? And he said, well, state espionage, we all do. It's commercial espionage that we're worried about, that people are stealing commercial secrets and getting commercial advantage about it. But actually, if you don't speak to the president, but you speak to the man in the street, what is the biggest threat today to them? It's actually cybercrime and scams, which take exquisite advantage of an understanding of human nature and its vulnerabilities. And you don't need to convince people that this is something dangerous, pernicious, a clear and present threat. And what people want to know, so what are you going to do about it? What is happening in the cyber world to deal with state espionage, commercial espionage, cybercrime? And they want answers. I think the purpose of having these conferences is to show first to people that we acknowledge these threats and that the people with the deepest technical knowledge are focused on making it better. And mind you, it cannot just be a matter of, whack-a-mole. Every time your AI invents a better hack, your defensive AI invents a response to it. Actually, I can't help feeling a more fundamental reset of designs, of systems is necessary. And that fundamental design has to take into account human interface and interaction. And then finally, in the political arena, I'm a great believer in transparency. And I'll give you an example that I learned from climate change. Not everyone believes in climate change. And unfortunately, it has sometimes become an ideological or political posture. So if you try to impose rules on everyone, it's damn difficult. But what we did in the Paris Agreement was to make the system radically transparent. So we will know how much or how little you are doing. And the purpose of that transparency is not for your neighboring country to criticize you, but so that your own domestic electorate will know whether you're doing, which direction you're going, and whether your policies are fulfilling the desires of your local voters. Because ultimately, politics is a local affair. And by having transparency and making voters aware of the implications of your decisions and your designs and your technology and your application of technology, I believe that political pressure could be brought to bear on leaders to hopefully do the right thing on a global stage. So it's a counterintuitive example, but it's to recognize that all politics is local, and that even when you're dealing with a global commons issue, by making it transparent and by educating your electorate, voters will put our feet to the coals and make sure we deliver the common good for the long-term future. So that's why this conference is important, and that's why I want to commend David for making sure that this has been inclusive. And it's not just a gathering of friends having a beer, but better still, it should include adversaries and getting together, coming up with solutions, and then being held accountable through transparency to your own domestic stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Minister, for ending on that hopeful, still realistic, but non-cynical note. And indeed, I think all the panelists have really illuminatingly enlightened us on the future of multilateralism, and there's hope. And we have to keep plugging and trying at it. And I think events like SICW will pave the way for greater cooperation. Can you please put your hands together for the panelists today?
A very big thank you to our moderator, Dr. Shashi Jayakumar, as well as our panelists. In first welcoming our keynote speaker, Ms. Claudia Plattner is President of the Federal Office of Information Security Germany, who will now deliver the keynote speech. Ms. Plattner, please.
Well then, everyone, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the chance to kick us off with a few words. And I'll try to offer a personal perspective on the topic, and hopefully that indeed will start a discussion. If I am a little bit provocative, so be it. That usually makes for better discussions. So let me start by indeed saying something very personal, which is I want to live in a digital world that is free, that is secure, that is rules-based, and that is about me as a customer or a user. I do not want to live in a digital world that binds me to an ecosystem and forces me to choose. I want choice. I do not want to live in a digital world that endangers my well-being by being insecure. That's the opposite of secure. I do not want to live in a digital world that favors only the strongest, or the one with the biggest market share, or the bully, if you will, which is the opposition of rules-based. I do not want to live in a digital world where I, or my data, actually becomes the product. I want to be the customer. Where my business becomes subject of, let's say, political muscle flexing, or my digital choices are subject to a power play of political systems. This is what I do not want. I want to live in a free digital world. Let's break that down a little bit. As a customer, I do not want to be fought over. I want to be served. That's the idea of customer. Meaning, let's take the example of social media. I want to be social on social media. I do not want to be manipulated into either this or that opinion. I do not want to be fought over. I want to have a service where I can connect with other people. That was the idea of social media. The same holds for my consumer choices. They should not be the symbol of political statements. Whether I use WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram or WeChat or whatnot, it's really very much about being the customer. I do not want to have to choose who gets my data. It should be obvious. No one, unless I decide that's okay. So it should not be a system choice. And as a business, let's say I'm a business, I do not want to have to choose ecosystems again that tie me in and that will not let me out for the rest of my company's life. I want to have choices. I do not want to have to choose ecosystems that actually are tied too tightly into a political system. I do not want to have to choose ecosystems and thereby decide which state or government gets to actually monitor, read, or control my data or my every move as a business. And last but not least, as a country, not as a consumer, not as a business, but as a country or a state or a public institution, I do not want to have to choose sites or political systems just by choosing what kind of digital service I use. This should be a business choice. So what it comes down to is what I want to have is choices. I need to have choices. Choices that allow me to choose vendors and services for a digital world that is indeed free, secure, rules-based, and about me as a customer, whether I'm a consumer or a business or indeed maybe even a state. And the only way to prevent polarization in the digital world, that's already ongoing, we all know that, is by having interoperability. That is the only way, and only then can there be a variety of products and vendors. And only then can there be innovation in the best interest of the customer, including security, by the way, and not just in the interest of the vendor. Products that serve the customer and not just the producer, or maybe even a systemic interest behind that. And only if we insist on interoperability, on standards, on openness, can we make sure that everyone has a say in what the digital world of tomorrow should look like, and not just a few. And with these theses, with these thoughts, I would like to kick us off into the discussion. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Plattner. Kindly take your seats on stage. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now move into our second high-level panel on diplomacy. Please put your hands together as we invite your moderator, Dr. Tobias Feeken, founder, Protostar Strategy. Also introducing your panelists as well, Ms. Claudia Plattner, whom you just heard from, is President, Federal Office of Information Security, Germany. Mr. Miguel Angel Cañada, Head of Cabinet and National Coordination Center, NCCES, Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute, Spain. Also introducing AVM Amon Chomchoy, Secretary General of the National Cybersecurity Agency of Thailand. And Ms. Atsuko Okuda, Regional Director, ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, International Telecommunications Union. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our panel, please. And over to you, Dr. Feeken. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Claudia, I've got to say, that was so refreshing to hear such a personal approach to your keynote. It really struck me, and I think it's so interesting to hear a senior official speak from the heart as a citizen as well. So thank you for that. And good morning to you all who are here. I think I was going to kick off by doing something which is probably quite risky. We heard from our keynote this morning from Foreign Minister Balakrishnan and in the panel previously. It was an excellent keynote, excellent panel, which was talking a lot about the importance of interoperability. And I heard many times the statement that cyberspace is borderless. And I think we might be challenging that in this panel. I don't know if that's wise to do so, but it's certainly something that we should think about, because as we often describe cyberspace as borderless, it is increasingly shaped by borders that we're establishing ourselves via our policy mechanisms. You know, today over 120 countries have enacted data protection laws. Dozens of governments have released national AI strategies, which it's questionable whether they are actually going to be interoperable in the years to come. I think the OECD puts that estimate at about 70 different countries that have different jurisdictional AI policies. And they reflect sovereignty and security concerns that governments have around these technologies. But they're also producing the risk that we're going to create a complete patchwork of different incompatible systems, which, as we've heard repetitively, is not really an ideal state that we want to be in, especially if, as consumers and citizens, we don't want to be in that end state. And it's a profoundly geopolitical question, and one which I was involved heavily in during my time in government, especially around 5G decisions, which we won't go into any more detail here. So I think, we're already seeing that same pattern occur as with 5G around AI standards, around cybersecurity standards. And really what happens there is that smaller states and developing states are those that are going to be disadvantaged. And we've heard that. So the central question for this panel today is, are we heading towards a world of interoperable frameworks, or are we drifting towards a bifurcated world? And I know from talking last night with Amon, he has been thinking extensively about this issue of bifurcation. So I'm going to abuse the fact that we had dinner together last night and start with Amon and ask you that question. How is bifurcation impacting you and your work? And what does a bifurcated tech world look like? And what are the risks that might create? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but I have to confess with you that the situation many nations, including Thailand, are facing, I just learned yesterday that there's a word for it, but we have seen it for many times because, of course, at the end, I think every nation wants the safety, security, and prosperity and economic gain, and that's the bottom line. Everything we do is involve those issues. And now, since we are moving on to the digital and cyberspace, we are forced every day on how to choose which services, which hardware, which software that we need to buy. Okay, so those are the situations that we are facing. Okay, and right now, even though we focus mainly on cyberspace, which is our main business, but at the end, we have to learn personally about the instrument of power. We have to learn about diplomatic, information, military, and also economy. Because sometimes they want you to choose something, some technology, but the way that they convey the message, they don't go directly and say that you need to buy this from us because we want to make money. They might say that, okay, you need to buy this from us because the others is not safe. There might be some problem with the other. Okay, or if you choose this, you wouldn't be neutral. You will be choosing side. So you need to buy this piece of equipment or hardware or software. Okay, so with this kind of situation, I think in some way we are quite lucky for Thailand because it's always our national position and policy to be neutral. Okay. But when we say neutral, it's not like standing by and not choosing side, but it must be smart neutral. So we need to know which side that we should side on in some situation. So it requires a lot of brain power to think about what would be the best for our nation when we have to make decision. And even harder for some decision that should remain not making any decision. So life is getting be more complicated in cyberspace regarding the technology. And right now, as you know, there are probably two major source of equipment and technologies. So we have to make some choices all the time. And sometimes it getting to be difficult more and the others. Okay, and those are the situations they are facing. And I think many small nations who doesn't own the technology probably face the same challenges.
I wonder, Claudia, if you could reflect on, what does that bifurcation look like from a European perspective? I really enjoyed the way that you characterized, what you would like to see. How is this kind of bifurcation contest playing out in the European context? And perhaps Miguel would like to chime in afterwards.
So what you just said really resonates with us as well. There really shouldn't be any need to make a choice, but really should be perfectly fine to stay neutral. And it should also be perfectly possible to become digitally successful by tapping into ecosystems, because they are interoperable and you can actually have your own say in how you contribute to the technology building. And this is where the whole topic of sovereignty comes into play. Of course, we want to be digitally successful ourselves. And of course, we want to be capable of taking our own decisions, not have dependencies, and definitely not having to choose. And for this, it's like absolutely mandatory to have the right kind of interoperability, to agree on some common standards that actually allow for everyone to join in the game and be indeed a player on the playing field. So from a European perspective, the whole topic of sovereignty, of making sure that we do have our say in what's happening in our part of the digital world, is a major issue. And Europeans feel strongly about it right now, really strongly about it. So I expect there to be quite a few changes in the way that Europeans also buy technology and take decisions on that.
Interesting.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. It's a great opportunity for the Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute, as part of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, to be here. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's clear that technology is a neutral thing. But when you have to make a decision about technology, you are taking a position. That's also clear. I think we need here to understand that at the end of the day, the digitalization is not need to explain here that it's a reality for all of us. But when you're handling this, you have to manage the risk in the different part of the chain. So for us, it's clear that at the customer, at the people level, we have to keep this neutrality. But when we are talking about the critical infrastructure, when we are talking about the critical part of the governmental capabilities, we have to make decisions in order to ensure the strategic autonomy. The problem of Europe here is that we want to be digital sovereign, but we don't have a big industry on this part. So when we discuss about the cloud, we have to understand that our position here is we don't have a big company. We have big companies working on the cloud, but the big players maybe are not in our region. So we need to establish this cooperation with them. So the sovereign is something that we have to, we need to make sure that we are working on that. We have to do that road, but also it's much more important to handle the risk at the different levels and to make sure that the strategic autonomy is guaranteed with the policies that we implemented. And then for the rest of the actors involved, we have to make sure that they have access to the technology, because here the difficulty is the balance between the sovereign or the autonomy and the access to technology. We have to understand that the way that we are handling this situation has a lot of impact for the reality that the big industries are not in Europe, or at least we are not the same level of big industry that in other regions have. So we need to guarantee the access and in that sense the interoperability, but handling the risk level, let me say, that is important to us to keep safe.
I find it really interesting when I reflect. I've spent way too much time looking at cybersecurity, kind of emerging technology issues, and a lot of time that I spent in government was as a diplomat looking at terminology and trying to make sure that terms like cyber sovereignty were in no document that I was anywhere near or had a hand in. And I find it fascinating now, and it's just a passing comment, that now we as a global community are obsessed with our tech sovereignty and creating, national approaches to tech development. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I just find it an interesting reflection, and especially when you're looking at the diplomatic language set that's used in multilateral organizations. And one of those multilateral organizations that I always had tremendous fun engaging with, because it was just it was the coalface of where you saw so many of these different geopolitical issues play out, was at the ITU itself. And many fond memories of engaging with the ITU. And Atsuko, I remember working extensively with your office. And so you have a quite unique view of the region, because you're working with governments in this region. You know, how do you see countries in our region being impacted by almost this tug of war of technology supply, of limitations on different aspects of technology supply chain?
Thank you for this great question, and good morning to everyone. And perhaps I should start to introduce a little bit about ITU. I'm pretty sure that all the panelists know about us, but I'm not sure about the participants. As you know, ITU is the oldest UN agency specialized for digital technology. And in fact, we discussed a lot about open-ended working group at the higher diplomatic level, but we have a lot of multilateral conversations taking place at the technical level. And I think this is quite fundamental to discuss the interoperability and what it means to Asia and the Pacific, because there are already a lot of resolutions, standards, approaches that 194 countries plus over 1,000 industry and academia members of ITU agreed upon over the years. So, for example, on the topic of cybersecurity, we have about 10 resolutions, plus a lot of standards which came out of the ITU processes. I don't want to go into each one of them. I think AI will do an excellent job of summarizing what these resolutions are. So what I want to say is that it's critical for us to make sure that technological or technical common ground on the multilateral space continues expanding, because to me, this is where of course, the differences will come out of it, but still, the nations, small and big, can subscribe to the same technological and technical common ground. So let me come back to your question on what that means in Asia and the Pacific. You can see that the countries are prepared to a varying degree in Asia and the Pacific. So what we have been doing is to use assessments, which is developed and subscribed by 194 member states of ITU plus 1,000 plus members, to assess the readiness of each country using the tool called Global Cybersecurity Index. I hope that all of you have seen it in the past, and it has 83 variables to measure the posture or readiness, and accordingly, we support member countries in the area where the shortcomings were identified, so that we remain neutral, yet we understand the challenges and opportunities of each country. And you will see in the report that there are Tier 1 to Tier 5 countries globally. And in Asia and the Pacific, we are valid. We have top cybersecurity ready countries, about 10, but we have in each category countries. So to answer your question, or to start answering your question, I believe it's very important for us to recognize this technical or technological level of multilateralism which exists. There is a very well established process already. And to perhaps use an organization like ourselves, which is neutral, which can provide important insights on the challenges and opportunities of countries in Asia and the Pacific.
You've jogged my memory. I was chuckling away to myself, thinking about the many hours spent at the ITU and trying to make sure that we were putting the right people in the right place to talk about specific standards, and having to develop a paper which was fully comprehensible to our foreign minister so that she could understand the importance of standards. The success was probably too great because she became obsessed about standards at the ITU and we got continual questions about it. So we perhaps went too far. But I'm interested in our operational community here in just help the audience understand how important are those standards that, if you like, allow interoperability in cybersecurity? And is there a nice, neat example, or even a messy example, of where you could highlight how important those standards are? And that's an open question.
I can
Claudia,
start
please.
this off. Very important. So that's the short answer. Very, very important. So, for example, these days we're talking about standards for telecommunications, 6G, beyond. And when it comes to making sure that we have the right kind of security standards in those standards, it's very important that we have the right people in the room, the right voting power in the room. Let me be quite frank about this, in order to make sure that indeed the appropriate security measures are being baked into the standards so that we will not suffer from this in the future. The same holds for example, for AI. We need to make sure that we find some common ground in order to make sure that, for example, for agentic AI, we indeed have the right kind of authentication mechanisms, security postures in there. If we don't get this right, we will suffer the same consequences as we did, for example, when we came up with the email 30 years ago, which is still the highest growing, still growing means of communication on this planet. But it was never meant to be done in a secure fashion, because back then people were thrilled that they could actually send each other messages, which would, immediately materialize on another screen somewhere else on this planet. That was amazing. No one thought about security. If we make the same mistakes with 6G, if we make the same mistakes now with AI, we will all suffer from it the same way we today suffer from the lack of security in email. I'm just saying one word: phishing. So this is something we have to look into. So that was the long answer for the very short, compressed answer, which is very important.
I agree with what Claudia said, but yes, so something that is very important, the standards, and we have to understand, and we are in this process in Europe for a long time with the cybersecurity schemes, for example, that the European Agency ENISA is trying to develop. There is always a political part on this standard, and we have to try to avoid that part. The standards should be technical. It's very difficult to keep it in the technical sphere. It's always a political decision, but you incorporate at the end of the day. It depends on the standard that we are talking about. But for us, the most important thing here is try to keep it as technical as possible. And then there are another forums and there are other spaces to the interpretation of the standard and the political application of the standard. Because it's not, we will have something that we are finding, for example, with the cloud scheme of ENISA in Spain, that it's very difficult to reach a common position. So, but also it's important, this multilateral vision of this activity. So you have to understand the different interests of the regions, because behind of this is clear that there is some kind of economic, political position also. So our idea is to try to keep as technical as possible the discussion, and then give us some room for the economic, political interpretation and application of that. If you don't do that, our experience is that you are not gonna reach common ground for have a common position on that.
And I do agree with the standard, and I think that's how the small nation will survive. Okay, because for small nation, we are not the owner of technologies, and we are always forced to make the decision. But one thing that we could do is that join in with international organization. We join in with organization or multilateral like ASEAN. We can help as one voice to choose the standard that actually, fit and suitable for everyone. And that should be the basis of the technologies. Because if we are forced to choose, we can just refer to ITU standard that we cannot do this because we sign on with the ITU standard. So could help with as a shield in terms of make sure that we buy something that it will be suitable, expandable, scalable for the future. Okay, so we have high hope to have work on that as well. But the thing is, manufacturer and the major power, they know about it. So they try to force and influence the standard. So that would be another issue that we have to tackle with to make sure that if we choose some standard, then it should be applicable for all sides of major power that plan to invest in the newer technology.
To one of the points that was made, one of the things that we took to doing with our delegation teams, and sorry, I know my accent is a little bit lost in between Australian and English, but for the Australian government was a buddy system. So we used to partner a deep technical expert with a multilateral expert so that they could both help each other out, point the loopholes in what was being negotiated. And we started rolling that out quite a number of years ago and to a degree of success. On the AI front, and a slight plug here, there's a piece of research that I'll be releasing today looking at regional trends on AI regulation, policy, and critical infrastructure. And it's genuinely a patchwork quilt. How confident are you that we can get to a good place in AI standards interoperability? Because at the moment, from what I see, it seems to be going off in all sorts of different directions.
If I may,
please.
Artificial intelligence is it's a big concern to us. We are seeing in as national response team, our national research that we are seeing a strong. I mean, the use of artificial intelligence and the easy way to use artificial intelligence to make attacks is extremely. It's a big concern to us. But at the same time, if you want to keep it in a most comfortable space, if you want to keep in the safe room to artificial intelligence, you have to think that the other side of the business is not going to be doing that. So you need to increase the research on the application of artificial intelligence and to have room for the companies to invest much more on that, because the cyber criminals are investing a lot on that part. So you need at least to match the ability that they have in the use of artificial intelligence. So specifically this technology and another similar to that are a very big concern, because we are seeing the big impact of this new technology on the attack that we are handling. So we are managing almost 100,000 attacks every year, and the share of the artificial intelligence is growing and growing too much. So that's why I think that in this specific topic we have to be more open-minded in order to ensure that we can at least again reach the capabilities of the cyber criminals.
Mm-hmm. I am seeing now that we have 10 minutes left of the panel, and I realize I need to bring the audience into this. I'm being incredibly selfish and hogging all the questions. There's one that's really struck out on here, and hopefully I'm not being too mischievous again by putting this in the mix, and I'll read it verbatim, okay? So the US and China are setting up different rules of the road for cyber, one driving on the left, one driving on the right. Can't we possibly drive in the middle? Is it possible? And Amon, I'm going to put you on the spot again. I can see you smiling.
Yeah, we do that every day.
How easy is that?
I think the main thing is that try to keep it balanced. And I would like to refer to the DAM model that I've explained before. First, on the diplomacy side, we have to have cooperation on both sides. It's not neutrality when you're just standing still, but it means that you are actively participate in all parties. But the more difficult one is the information, because on both sides, there will be a lot of campaign on misinformation. On one side, they will say, but the other one is bad guy. On the other side, they do the same thing. So how do you manage to show to the Thai people, because those are the constituency that you want to keep happy, that it's all convey the right message that at the end benefit to us. Okay, and on the military side, for that one, I have to interpret in terms of cyber defense, because at the end, it doesn't matter which source of attacker came from. We all want to be protected. Doesn't matter if it's an actual threat from the actual source or some other campaign that might have different purpose. Because at the end, we want the economy prosperity to Thai people. That's the guiding principle on what we have to do to keep it balanced between the choice that we have to make every day for Thailand.
I'm interested in everyone's reflections on this because I think you all have really interesting kind of unique ways in which this will affect you. Perhaps from an ITU perspective, because you're right in the middle of this.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Amon ended with a very important insight, incentives. I think this is something we haven't discussed, but what's the incentive of encouraging standards or the use of standards and interoperability? Because definitely it will reduce the cost of developing products. And of course, as Claudia said, it will reduce the need to choose because they will be interoperable by design, right? So I think creating more incentives among all of us to cooperate and subscribe to the international norms perhaps is the key. Can I tell you one concrete example? Again, I want to use an ITU standards. There is one standard which is very useful in securing the mobile services on using the ITU cybersecurity standards. And because everyone sees the benefit of using or developing the standards, right, to make sure your mobile services are secure, we have developed a program to check if that's the case or not. It's called the DFS Lab. Please check on your phone. You can do Google search or AI search. So if, let's say, we really agree or frame our discussion on the incentives of cooperation, perhaps this conversation can really advance and can maybe next year talk about something slightly different because of that framing and advancing of the conversation.
Perhaps I could call on Miguel and Claudia to also interlink the other question that we have there, because it does link in quite neatly, which is, well, if this is the case that, you're trying to drive down the middle of the road without getting caught in a horrible accident, what are the kind of strategies that you can employ to minimize this bifurcation and promote the interoperability side of emerging technologies that, of course, we all want to use, we all want to benefit for. As the foreign minister said, these are the foundational technologies of the next century, and we want our societies to be able to benefit from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, again, me as a customer in whatever role, I want exactly this choice, the possibilities to indeed avoid that and drive in the middle of the road whenever I want. I think what it really comes down to is markets. We need to have open markets, and interoperability allows for that. It's kind of like a necessary condition. But if we want to keep our markets open, because that is kind of like the question behind it, really, we need to make sure that indeed they can stay open. And with the kind of political situation we're finding ourselves in the world, this is a major challenge. And at the end of the day, the question of whether we can keep markets open will come down to trust. It will come down to trust. So that means that we need to be able to trust the vendors, and we need to be able to trust the systems behind the vendors where they are located. So this is, at the end of the day, a very crucial question that really what it comes down to. The strategies should therefore be for everyone who wants to be, or for anyone who's interested in being part of as big a market as anyhow possible, is to indeed foster that trust, become trustworthy. I think that's the most important part. So when it comes to strategy building, I'd say that's really the most important thing we need to do. We need to make sure that trust and security is really at the heart of everything we build, That will keep the markets open. And that will allow us to have interoperability, not just on paper, but indeed in the real world. So that would be my best guess.
I think that, for trust and open markets, I think it's important the interoperability by design, but also the cybersecurity by design. I think clearly this can have a common ground when companies and governments can interact. But you have to make sure that you are ensuring that. It's important, the security part. And that's probably, we have an example of the European level union, which is the Cyber Resilience Act. And we are incorporating this, everybody knows that the European Union loves to make regulation. That I don't know if this is good or bad, but we are doing a lot always about that. But in this case, we are providing, probably we will need some time for the companies to adopt and implementing of these policies. But at the end of the day, what we are doing is make sure that all the digital products and services, all the different products that incorporate a digital component, we are talking probably 90% of the product, incorporate this security thing, this security by design thing, because it's important to make sure that you have common rules, and then you can make sure that your market is open, because you know that they are going to be incorporating at least minimum cybersecurity requirements.
Mm-hmm. I spend most of my time now dealing with large corporate clients, so I've switched from putting the government hat on to the more corporate side, and I can tell you, and I'm sure this tells you nothing that you don't know, a lot of these big organizations struggle immensely with the cross-jurisdictional nature of delivering operations, delivering cybersecurity, logistics. And so I think if they had a wish list, it would be that interoperability was achieved. And I think as I see our time running to an end, I'm going to ask us for a wish list before we finished. If you could make a wish, what would it be to achieve interoperability? And perhaps, Claudia, you can be lucky first, which often isn't, because it doesn't give you as much time to think.
Bad choice anyhow. I think fostering standards really is the key. As cumbersome as it may be, I wish for all of us to engage down this road, because this sets us off into a rule-based world, and I think that's really what we need.
Thank you, Miguel.
No, please.
We're each making a wish. Okay, we're skipping Miguel. We'll come back to you. Everyone's going to make one wish to make interoperability.
One wish is that for every decision we make, I wish we could have a backup plan and back out plan.
Okay.
Thank you. And in my case, I would like to encourage everyone to engage at international and regional policy and standard arena. Just very quickly, we are organizing a quadrennial telecommunication development conference in Baku in 3 weeks. It happens only every 4 years, and I hope that all of you can join and participate and be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Miguel, lucky laugh.
Yeah, no, I was sorry about that. One wish. I think my colleague summarized really good what I think that, but probably we have to understand we need to work at technical level. The political discussion is going to be very, very difficult. So I would say that we can keep this conversation in this technical level. We can provide the common ground, and then it is not going to happen in this, I wish. But at least we need to try to make this technical debate.
Okay, so I think we should reconvene in a year's time to see if we can have any of those wishes come true. We'll all try our best. I would like it for all of you to say thank you to our wonderful panel. I think that's been an incredibly rich discussion, and one that will no doubt keep continuing for the months and years to come. But I would also like to extend an enormous amount of gratitude to CSA, David and his team, who create the kind of magic that really is Singapore Cyber Week and bringing us all together for this discussion. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much to our moderator, Dr. Tobias Vivian, and our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, do join me now and put your hands together to welcome our panel For this session, introducing your moderator, Mr. David Koh, Commissioner of Cybersecurity, Chief Executive, Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, Chief Digital Security and Technology, Chief Quantum Advisor, Ministry of Digital Development and Information, Singapore. Also introducing your panelists, Ms. Larissa Schneider-Kalza, Head Cyber Defense and Security Division, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Brazil. Ms. Tupotua Baravilala, Director General for Digital Government Transformation, Cybersecurity and Communications, Ministry of Communications, Fiji. His Excellency Gobind Singh Deo, Minister of Digital, Malaysia. And Mr. Andrew Whitaker, Head of Cyber Policy Department, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel, and over to you, Mr. Koh.
Thanks so much. Very good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. I'm privileged today to share the stage with such distinguished speakers, panelists who have flown in from across the globe. Some have joined us for several iterations of SICW already, and I'd like to welcome everyone here for today's panel on the United Nations and consensus building. The focus of our discussions today is on the future of a global, rules-based multilateral order in cyberspace. As you are aware, the recently concluded United Nations Open-Ended Working Group on the security of and in the use of ICT have agreed to establish a UN global mechanism on ICT security by consensus. This is a significant milestone because it affirms the UN's convening power to be able to bring states together amidst the difficult geopolitical tensions that we have today. Yet, sustaining this momentum requires us to adapt. This will enable us to move towards actionable outcomes and will foster closer international cooperation, which we believe will benefit all countries and our citizens in all nations. So this sets the stage for today's discussion. Let us consider how the UN's role on consensus-based approach can continue potentially to be relevant and effective in our cybersecurity interests. I'll begin with a couple of questions, but I would encourage you, as the MC said, to scan the Slido and please give us your own questions. Let me begin with Larissa. What are some positive and negative lessons from past UN-led discussions, mechanisms such as the GGE and the OEWG? And those lessons would then better place the UN global mechanism for ICT security for success next year. Your views, please, Larissa.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be back here again at this panel with you here at Cyber Week. So as some of you know, Brazil was one of the few developing countries that participated in most of the GGE process. I keep forgetting if we had 6 or 7 GGEs, but out of those, we only did not participate in one of them, and we presided 2 of those editions. And we, of course, were also very active participants at the OEWG. And our experience being very active in those 2 formats, I think already gives us one lesson for the next mechanism, which is really knowing when to choose the best format for the discussion for a specific moment. The GGE format, Group of Governmental Experts, is a pretty common discussion format within disarmament and arms controls issues, and which is really, it is very good, and it works very well when discussions are more incipient, when they're starting, when you don't really have very established positions on the issues. You have smaller groups, you have a closed format, delegates are talking on a personal capacity, even though they are government affiliated, which gives you more freedom to discuss and propose ideas for something that isn't as consolidated. However, we do see the GGE format as having a limited shelf life, so to speak. And I think in cyber that was made very clear. There comes a point where you need greater inclusivity, where you need transparency. when it will be important for all states and stakeholders to actually know what states are defending in the room instead of those discussions only taking place in a closed format, which allows for greater legitimacy to our debates and to our decisions. And so, of course, that is what happened with the OEWG. And in a way, for us, having that more universal process, and I think it's important to remind that when the OEWG process started, there was some objection to having a universal format for discussions. But it was really important. And in a way, it was a catalyst for the development of greater maturity in terms of how countries approached international discussions on cybersecurity. I think at the end of the OEWG process, we especially after the second one, within those 5 years, we really noticed a lot just how much things changed in terms of how many countries that had never spoken about cybersecurity issues before now had very clear national positions on a range of issues pertaining to the OEWG's mandate. And I think in a way, Singapore is actually a very good example. I think I told this story to a few colleagues, but never I think to you. But I was a first committee delegate in New York when my Singaporean counterpart asked me to grab a coffee to talk about our experience at the GGE, because Singapore had never taken part in one and was considering trying to engage in the process. And that was less than 10 years ago. And now Singapore is such a key player in international cybersecurity issues. So that really shows the importance of engaging in those processes and how those processes create the momentum for countries to develop their own capacities. And of course, this also, I think other lessons from the processes is the importance of a diversity of voices to the debate, which of course involves having stakeholders in the room for sure, but also means including voices from the developing world. So ensuring that developing countries can also be in the room, because at the end of the day, we need to have different perspectives, including in terms of resources, thinking of good practices that account for very different contexts across regions, across countries, and which of course also leads to the importance of capacity building. It's an issue that played a really important role throughout the OEWG mandate and will be key, of course, at the GMAC. It is one of the issues in the mandate of one specific thematic group. So having that focus is also a lesson that we will carry on. And in a way, this new mechanism and the past ones, they are really a testament to the effectiveness and the importance of multilateralism. We had the OEWG successfully conclude its mandate with the GMAC. We've recently adopted a cybercrime convention. And at the end of the day, even though we value discussions on different formats, the UN is where all states are represented, and it is where we must discuss and adopt rules and standards that we're hoping for everyone to follow. And of course, we also need to make some adjustments, particularly, I think, in terms of format. While the OEWG format was very important over the past 5 years, I do believe we will need to adjust some things as we move forward to allow for more in-depth discussions, hopefully that can engage technical experts as well as diplomats, and which can then lead for more practical solutions. At the end of the day, at the end of the OEWG's mandate, sometimes statements were getting a little bit repetitive because we were meeting every 3 to 4 months, and on some issues we hadn't really had that much change from one meeting to the other. So I think the thematic group format should allow, hopefully, for us to have more targeted in-depth discussions on specific issues and evolve towards agreeing on more practical outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larissa. You're right. Of the 6 GGE meetings that the United Nations held on cybersecurity. Singapore only participated in the last one. I had the honor of representing Singapore at the last UNGGE, which was ably chaired by the Brazilian diplomat Guilherme Patriota. So I remember him very fondly, and we were able to reach a consensus. And I remember distinctly when the proposal by the Russian Federation for us to move from the 25-member GGE to the 193-member OEWG, my thoughts were exactly that. How will we be able to get all of these countries, many of whom had never spoken on cybersecurity, to be able to contribute to the conversation? And how on earth would we be able to reach consensus? I'm very happy in the last 5 years that I've been proven totally wrong. Many countries have contributed to the conversation, and precisely as what Larissa said, it is an inclusive and a transparent process. And I think now with that, it has become a lot more a powerful statement when we reach consensus. Let me shift gears. Yang Berhormat Minister Gobian, there have been growing calls for UN cyber discussions to achieve practical and concrete outcomes, so beyond the diplomatic niceties. Malaysia is also seeking to achieve such outcomes for digital and cyber domains as part of the ASEAN chairmanship that Malaysia has the honor to lead this year. What lessons, if any, can the ASEAN region share to make the UN processes more effective?
Thank you, David. I think there's a need for us to set a bit of context when it comes to dealing with this question. First and foremost, everyone understands the impact of digital transformation, not just in their countries, but in their regions and also globally. What does that really mean? It means that as you go along, you're going to have to somehow transform your own country into one that's ready for new technology, because new technology is going to now redefine how it is we have done things before, and what we need to do so that we can take full advantage of this technology as we move ahead. Having understood this, we will realize that every country has a similar challenge. Every country has to start thinking about how they can transform. When you transform, you're looking at it from a very broad perspective. You're transforming the entire country. You're looking at it from a society perspective. You're looking at it from an economic perspective. You're looking at it from a governance perspective. So you would want to start talking about building an ecosystem in your own country that's able to deal with threats when it comes to digital transformation. Now, why is this important? It's important because I think conversations are currently being held and have been had in most countries about cyber threats and the urgency for governments to deal with those problems domestically. Now, this is important because if you are able to understand that in order for you to participate in this global discussion, work must really start at home first. You must be able to say to friends of yours in the region and globally that you have taken steps and real steps. You must be able to tell them that you have thought through this entire question of trust and security, and you've taken steps to introduce mechanisms in your own country that can deal with it. So in Malaysia, for example, apart from setting up the entire Ministry of Digital in 2022, the Prime Minister looked at it and he said, this is broad. We need to think about it and one ministry to deal with it. We started looking at how we can look at legislation. So in 2023, just 3 months after the ministry was set up, we tabled the Cybersecurity Act. The Cybersecurity Act, new legislation to deal with national critical information infrastructure and how we can make sure that we set standards that have to be met by we call these companies in our country so that they conform with the requirements that we as government say they must meet, so that we can say to the rest of the world that we have developed standards and standards that are now institutionalized by legislation. You see, we can speak about the problem of cybersecurity, but if we do not take practical steps, build legislation, and after you have legislation, you need to have institutions that can actually enforce this legislation. Now, why is this important? If you build infrastructure, ecosystems in your own country, then you'll start looking at your neighbors. You learn from them. You find that they have done things better, and then you improve as you go along. The reverse happens as well. You have neighbors looking at you and saying, look, this is what they have done, and that's what we need to do as well. So when you come to events like this and you have conversations, then the exchanges are a lot a lot more practical, because you're able to say to your friends, for example, when I speak to Singapore, I say, look, this is what you have done. I spoke to Minister Josephine yesterday, and I was saying to her that, for 6 months ago, she was talking about the Digital Infrastructure Act that deals with making sure that data centers are secure. And we looked at that and we said, look, I think this is a great idea. And, we also start looking at that, and that's currently in the process. Now, if that is something that we can jointly do, we are looking at developing legal regulatory frameworks that will share common ground. If it shares common ground, then you're going to have this problem of differences in regulation globally being resolved as and when you develop your systems. I think that saves us a lot of time, because immediately at the moment when you start the process, you already know what others are doing, and you design legislation, institutions that are similar, if not the same, because every country has its own peculiarities. But you work it out in a way that ensures that moving ahead, things are able to operate seamlessly when it comes to dealing with friends of yours regionally and also globally. Now, having said that and putting that into context, if we are able to develop that kind of thinking across the globe, you're going to find countries telling you what they have done, in their experience, what they think we should be doing, also sharing what we call in our experiences, looking at what we have done. And ultimately, that's where I think you're going to have this collaboration that we speak of in this huge area that cuts across the entire globe. And ultimately, you're going to be able to see not just policies being developed which have global impact, but also strategies that are layered on this policy so that we can actually see these policies taking effect. And it really comes back down to enforcement, because ultimately you can have all of this. The question is how you're going to make sure that there is enforcement, because you're going to have a group of people that say to you, look, this is what you say, but I don't have to listen to you. So how do we then deal with that problem? And I think at the global level, when you speak, look at UN, and the working group that has been established, they've done phenomenal work, David. We've got a group of people that really focus, they understand the problem, and they've come back to us and said, look, this is what we think you should do. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? And I think if you look at ASEAN and the steps that ASEAN has taken, and as chair this year, Malaysia has taken it upon itself to lead in the sense of showing that we have not just put forward legislation, we also start building institutions, because we recognize the fact that ultimately it really comes back down to the strengths that you have domestically, and then being able to borrow from strengths that you find in regional partners around you, and of course globally. I think if we're able to do that, it creates a mindset that will eventually lead to a solution that works. Otherwise, David, what's going to happen is you're going to have a conversation that's very popular. You're going to have many conferences, and ultimately it comes back down to, yes, this is what we need to do, but how do we do it? So I think I must congratulate Singapore. Taking the lead in holding conferences of this nature, and in particular when it comes to the ASEAN member states, I think a lot of work has been done. We had, this meeting yesterday, discussions, open discussions. I think all of us understand the extent of the problem. We know that digital transformation is not going to wait for any country. We have to start work now. And as we build infrastructure to deal with digital transformation, we prepare society, we prepare the economy, and of course governance for that purpose. We need to start talking about how we can build trust. And ultimately, it's trust not just at home, it's trust regionally, globally, because threats don't see borders. A threat in Malaysia can also be a threat somewhere else in the world. We want to make sure that when something happens, we know where to go. We know who to call. And we know if we did that, then there's a process that takes place that will deal with the problem. And I think that's something that we really need to start thinking about seriously. And everyone really has to start putting their heads together to get it done. I always use this example, David, of CrowdStrike. We all came into our rooms, we switched on our computers, and we had blue screens. None of us knew. Were we going to see aeroplanes falling out of the sky? We didn't know if it was a cyber attack. We did not know if it was a technical glitch. I did not, at that point in time, of course, I had the privilege to call ministers in the region and ask them, look, do you know exactly where we are? And of course, Microsoft later got in touch with us and told us, look, this is the problem. And we spoke about it for 2 or 3 days after that. People said, this is, serious concern, this, that, the other. But let's be realistic about it. After that, we've moved on. it can happen right now again. The question is, if it happened again and it was a real threat, are we ready? And I think we have to be realistic about this. If we think that we are not, then work must start, and it must start now. And I think all of us have that shared responsibility to work together to put together this framework that works to keep us safe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister Gobin. I remember you came on the media during the CrowdStrike incident in Malaysia. And thank you also for reminding us we blame the international multilateral processes, but actually the work has to begin domestically. We have to transform ourselves within government, economically, and across the society. And that shift to practical outcomes, I think that's also enough talking. Let's go into do some implementation. Thank you very much, Minister. Andrew, let me move on and ask you, how can UN cyber discussions be better scoped or designed to encourage more active adoption and implementation, exactly as Minister Gobin has talked about, of the norms, rules, and principles of state behavior in cyberspace?
Well, thank you, David, and thank you very much for the whole team for what's been a really fantastic week. And while I thank the Singaporeans, can I also add Ambassador Ghaffur, who did a really fantastic job of shepherding us through to consensus. And that was not an easy task, given the sort of challenging geopolitical backdrop. But I think it's real credit both to him, but that it recognizes that for all of us, we wanted to get to that point. And so I think establishing the global mechanism is a great start. But as you say, the challenge now is how do we turn that into making a really meaningful difference? And I think there's a couple of things that I would draw out. So first of all, the way it is set up, the plenary will allow us to talk about the different themes that we have. But we also have these two dedicated thematic groups. And I think, first of all, recognizing the consensus shown to capacity building, I think is one very practical way that certainly from a United Kingdom's perspective, we'll be wanting to strongly support those efforts as we have done in the past and want to continue taking that forward. But that's one way of demonstrating the sort of consensus building that we're trying to find there. Then I think the challenge, and this is what's new about the new setup, is that we have this second dedicated thematic group. And that for us is really about how do we draw the discussion across the different pillars that the plenary has to make sure that's a holistic discussion and we're not just talking in very separate silos as we go forward. I think the second part, though, is making sure that we don't overload these conversations. There's so much potentially to be talking about. Digital tech is sort of everything. No doubt we'll mention artificial intelligence at some point. We've got a very wide range of threats. So how do we make sure that we're very clear in what we are using that discussion for, but also then drawing it together with many other initiatives that are happening and have really valuable discussions. So I think about the work of UNIDIR, but I think the other point, and building off what Larissa has already said, there's some really fantastic contributions from think tanks, from academia, from civil society, but also the great technical expertise from industry. So I think trying to think about how we draw on that multi-stakeholder approach and engagement, really welcoming a very diverse range of voices to the discussion. That will help us join up, but those discussions are ongoing throughout the year. So we don't need to duplicate those. We need to be thoughtful about how we draw them in to the conversation and then make use of the thematic group and the plenary to really have a very good conversation in the round. And then I think the final point I want to make, and again, really welcoming the approach that Singapore has taken, it is on all of us to be clear when we are seeing breaches of that responsible behavior. And I know that Singapore recently have called out one of the APTs. Certainly for the United Kingdom, we've talked about various cyber criminal groups and other malicious actions that we've seen. And bringing that out into the public domain allows us to have a better and richer discussion. And I think that's one of the areas that we welcome other states coming forward to contribute to that discussion and being prepared to call out and say when they are seeing a sort of breach of what we would consider responsible behavior in cyberspace. And I think those collective bits together being quite pragmatic about how we're looking at this, grounding it in examples, drawing the conversation together, but then making sure it's a genuinely inclusive and a multi-stakeholder conversation. I think from where I'm sat, the global mechanism will give us a really good framework, but it won't be the only bit, and it allows us to draw it together.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think from Singapore's perspective, we did call out the APT attacker on our country's critical infrastructure, and the main driver was to really put our own population at notice that despite the calm that you see on the surface, actually below the surface, there are these activities going on in cyberspace. And thank you for your comments of not overloading the process. There are many other things, new developments that take place, and we do need to draw in the expertise of all these other discussions as well as the other stakeholders. And your comment on the need for capacity building. And on that note, let me move on to Tupo. How do you think the UN global mechanism needs to ensure to be effective and with consistent representation, especially for small developing states with less diplomatic resources and who take almost 2 days to get from the Pacific to New York? Tupo, please.
Thank you. Mbulavanaka, and good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much for the question. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of key points that I would like to sort of emphasize on, but I note with the time constraints that we have, definitely one thing that we saw from the Pacific was a lot of the representation that was done at the UN were from capital. And so we had a lot of our Ministry of ICT and Communications teams traveling from capital to the UN because of the resource constraints that we had at our UN missions based in New York. So that was a real challenge even during the period that we were having the UNOEWG. But it also shows the priority that was given for small island developing states to be able to travel, to have those discussions, to be able to learn more and to be able to deepen our understanding and contribute to the in shaping those global frameworks. I think one key great initiative that we saw that ensured that there was that consistent participation is the Women in Cyber Fellowship. And this actually saw a lot of, I would say cyber diplomats, because when just Minister of Foreign Affairs officials, but also from capital, your Ministry of Communications and ICTs, and even some that were representing their certs, were coming and having those conversations. So it really helped, to Minister's point in terms of how do we ensure that we're implementing these things on the ground, and how do we ensure that there is that deeper and cross understanding of these real issues that are being discussed globally, but will need to come down at a regional level, that will then need to come down to a domestic level. And so that's something that we saw that really helped us, that better understanding, because we went to those discussions, understood what was being discussed, and then came back and saw how do we address that nationally and in our region. And one key initiative that I'd really like to point out in the region is recently, last month, the Pacific Island leaders have actually endorsed the Ocean of Peace Declaration. And this really looks at, the heart of what the UN Charter is advocates for, and in terms of all of our relations in the region, in the Pacific region, but also globally. And this, I'd just like to recall what I had discussed earlier in terms of how we do dispute resolution and how do we come together as a region in the Pacific. And that's known as the spirit of Talanoa, which has 3 key components. It needs to be inclusive, it needs to be participatory, so we need to ensure that everyone is at the table and everyone is speaking and everyone understands the same language. And it needs to, there needs to be genuine dialogue. And so I think this at the regional level is something, that we refer to as sort of the Pacific way, and seeing that, and the UN being the proper place for that. But we need to make sure that everyone is seated at the table. The Women in Cyber Fellowship, allowed for those fellowships so that you had consistent representation from capital to then go back to capital and implement all of these discussions. So we have the checklist, of CBMs for Fiji. We're currently finalizing our national cybersecurity and resilience strategy. We finalized and launched our national digital strategy in April. As we were drafting these strategies, we were making sure that we were actually putting in all of these elements because we wanted to see how does it look like in the Fiji context. And in the Pacific region, the Lakatoi Declaration, which is on digital transformation and cybersecurity, is a key pillar. How does all of these frameworks look like within the region? And I'm very happy about the announcement that Minister Josephine Teo had mentioned in terms of the cross-regional capacity building, which we're looking forward to as well in December. But yeah, with those few words, I think I'm very excited about I know I'm excited about the global mechanism sessions that we'll be having next year.
Thank you very much, Tupo. And I think that ASEAN is very proud to extend ASEAN Singapore Cyber Center of Excellence training to the Pacific Islands Forum Group. And we hope that will help you in your inclusive conversations. There are a couple of questions here that I have. I want to direct it, and I'll merge two of the questions. What are some concrete steps that the UN should prioritize in the next 2 to 3 years to strengthen cyber cooperation at the international and regional levels? Minister Gobind, I'll ask you to kick off, and I'll merge the second question. And how can international cyber discussions avoid being paralyzed by strategic competition between major powers such as the US, China, and Russia? So you can choose to address either part of the question. Minister, please.
Thank you, David. It's a good question. It's a problem that has always sort of slowed things down. Every country will have its own priorities. Every country speaks about sovereignty. We understand that, we respect that. And when that becomes a barrier, then it slows down the pace at which we develop cross-border mechanisms that enable us to deal with problems like this. Because, as I said earlier, if you look at cyber threats and building trust in this new digital world that we now see, it's really a complete shift of the approach. We have to start thinking of how we can begin conversations, understanding that whilst we want to focus on ensuring sovereignty, understanding that every country has its own regulatory frameworks, but we need to also think about being able to liberalize things a bit more so that we can actually put mechanisms in place that work. Otherwise, as I said earlier, you're going to have threats that can practically paralyze systems, and this in a split second. And you're really not going to be able to do anything about it because you have not engaged in that conversation openly. And I think that's where the problem is. I mean, I agree. I mean, Andrew's point made a lot of reference to how industry plays a huge role in this. And I think conversations in the room around inclusivity, I mean, governments speak about inclusivity, but we must take real steps to make sure that everyone is brought to the table, to your point, because if we don't do that, then it's just a conversation, but there are concerns out there. And I think the other point to make is time is of the essence. David, we've been speaking about DFA, right? The Digital Economy Framework Agreement for a long time. And understandably, it's a document that, stretches across all the ASEAN member states. So it takes time. But in this time, technology is developed. New threats have emerged. Yesterday, we were speaking about quantum and its impact. So now we have to relook at even this document that we have been talking about thus long. So it just tells you that, we have got to act fast. We have got to act fast and get things done. In order for that to happen, we must first look at building, and I repeat, our domestic strengths. And I think then you will be able to offer that infrastructure that you have, that ecosystem that you have in your country, as part of the mechanism that is able to solve a global problem. Ultimately, it's really a question of how much governments. Without being, this is a sensitive area, how much we are prepared to change, in the way we do things, so that we can build this global consensus about what needs to be done and ultimately getting it done. I think you also have to start looking at mechanisms by which things can be enforced, institutionalizing, different mechanisms. ASEAN is looking at how we can ensure that there are incident reporting mechanisms, and after incidents are reported, then action can be taken, who is to do what, and what have you not. We've set up what we call the search. Those are really, to me, transformational. But I think we need to move a bit faster, and ultimately we also need to start getting the buy-in of people beyond the region. And this is where the global discussion with the UN comes in, and I think we are definitely moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're running out of time, but I want to give the last word to the panelists. If you have one wish you have for that new UN global mechanism, I ask all of you, like, 30, 45 seconds. One wish, if you were king or queen for a day, if a magic wand, what would you ask for? Larissa, I'll begin with you.
That is always a tricky question, but I think, the wish that it continues to be and it turns as inclusive as possible. Inclusivity will be key for the success of our discussions.
Thank you. Tupo.
That we're able to achieve the collective goal that we've set out for ourselves, or at least take concrete steps forward.
Okay, Minister, by virtue of your rank, I'll keep you for last. Andrew.
I think it's trying to think sort of holistically, but without overloading just one bit of it. So there's lots of these discussions going on. Let's make sure we draw them together.
Holistic, but not overloading. Minister, you have the privilege of the last word.
Well, David, digital transformation is real, and so are the threats that come along with it. We really need to act fast. We have to create awareness, and this is not just awareness at government level. We have to start ensuring that people out there, everyone who has a smart device in their hands, understands exactly what that can do. And I think it's something that we need to inculcate in everyone. In order for this to work, it has to be, we say whole of nation, but I think this is a whole of world, effort. And I think the faster and the quicker we start speaking about it and spreading this message across, the more we get done.
Thank you very much. I think, ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me, the panels has been very insightful, saying that indeed this is a global problem that's affecting all of us, and success ultimately depends on inclusion, trust, and honest, sustained dialogue among not just states, but multi-stakeholder. But at the same time, let's not overload the whole process. And really, on that note, I think that we have a bit of optimism. We have a bit of this idea that we can do this together. It is a pressing problem. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists.
And thank you so much as well to our moderator, Mr. David Ko, as well as our panelists. Let's remain on stage for a group photo. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, do join me now in putting our hands together to welcome our panel, beginning with your moderator for this session, Mr. David Ko, Commissioner of Cybersecurity, Chief Executive, Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, Chief Digital Security and Technology, and Chief Quantum Advisor, Ministry of Digital Development and Information, Singapore. Also introducing your panelists, Ms. Larissa Schneider-Kalza, Head of Cyber Defense and Security Division, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Brazil. Ms. Tupotua Baravilala, Director General Digital Government Transformation, Cybersecurity and Communications, Ministry of Communications, Fiji. His Excellency Sergei Vershinin, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Russia. His Excellency Alexandre Tillman, Ambassador of Timor-Leste to Singapore, Timor-Leste. And Dr. Giacomo Percy Paoli, Head of the Security and Technology Program, United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. And now, over to you, Mr. Ko.
Thank you, and a very good afternoon to everyone, distinguished guests. I've lost my documents, but don't worry, I've got a fully resilient backup here, right? As is fitting for cybersecurity. And a good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to this discussion on the new UN processes, possibilities, and challenges. We have robust discussions on agentic AI earlier on, but now I would like to draw everyone's attention to the United Nations, which has been at the center of global efforts to promote peace, stability, and responsible behavior in cyberspace. The successful conclusion of the second UN Open-Ended Working Group on ICT security, which adopted a consensus report proposing the establishment of a UN global mechanism on ICT security, as well as the UN Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime, which completed its work on a draft UN Convention Against Cybercrime, are celebrated milestone successes in our international efforts against threats in cyberspace. However, there are questions if these mechanisms can indeed be effective in make a difference in meeting the challenges that we all face, especially in the newer and emerging threats such as AI, quantum, and cyber-enabled scams. So this panel will discuss what needs to be done to ensure that these successes don't just remain at the diplomatic level, diplomatic agreements on paper, but actually can be translated to make a difference on the ground. I'll start off with a few questions for the panelists, but I welcome all of you to submit your questions on our e-platform Slido. So let's begin the discussion. Now, the first two questions are, first question I'd like to direct to Larissa and to Sergey. We've heard earlier discussions on agentic AI as well as cyber-enabled scams. From your perspective, what practical measures can we hope for the new UN processes, whether through this proposed global mechanism on ICT security or the UN Convention Against Cybercrime, which you think will help the international community be more effective in terms of addressing these challenges which we all face? I'd like to ask Larissa first and then have Sergey to comment. Larissa, please.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here in Singapore and at this panel. Well, as we have all talked about countless times, when it comes to ICT threats, we are dealing with a borderless domain, which is why we need global solutions and collective action to address them. And this is why the UN plays such a central role. It is the space where all states are represented and where we can hope to actually achieve those solutions that can involve every single state. And so the establishment of the new mechanism is a very important point in our international discussions on cybersecurity. Singapore, of course, played a very central role in helping us achieve that, for which we will be always very grateful. The first two OAWGs were very important in terms of universalizing the international discussions on cybersecurity. I think we were talking before the panel earlier as to during the GGE formats, while they were very important in developing international discussions on cyber, they were very restrictive. Very few countries were involved. So the OAWG process was really important in bringing everyone to the table and ensuring that all countries started participating in the international discussions related to cybersecurity. And now, as we reach the new mechanism, well, first, it is really important to have something permanent within the UN structure to address those issues, including in terms of efficiency. We will no longer be wasting valuable time trying to decide how we are going to discuss issues now that we have something that is permanent. The fact that we will now have dedicated thematic groups should be very helpful in terms of bringing those discussions to a more practical level. So, of course, while diplomacy will always be a very important element of these discussions, having them take place partially through the thematic groups will allow us to have more, by having a more focused, more specific discussions on some issues, that means that we can actually bring our technical specialists to discuss them and thus agree on more practical solutions to the issues that we are facing, something that is more difficult to be achieved when the mandate is very broad. So I do think that the DTG format will be very key in ensuring that we have something more practical. And of course, the Convention against Cybercrime was also a very key component, a landmark achievement really on the global fight against cybercrime. And it establishes a legal framework for cooperation among states to exchange evidence, to cooperate in the investigation, the prosecution of those crimes. So that will have, I think, a very immediate, practical, concrete impact on the ground by facilitating global efforts to combat cybercrime, which, as we know, is a phenomenon that really doesn't know any borders. It nearly always has an international element involved. So having that convention in place will be very, very important to our efforts.
Thanks, Larissa. So cautiously optimistic. We have a universal platform like the United Nations where all states are represented, and then now we have frameworks. Sergey, your views on what we can hope for from these two mechanisms?
Thank you very much, David. I am proud to participate in this plenary session and this panel of the 10th Singapore International Cyber Week. And I see that the event grows in scale every year, bringing together more and more participants from all regions of the world. And it means that there is an increased interest of states, and it proves also their willingness to join efforts in effective countering threats in the digital sphere. And we have to acknowledge that the number of such challenges is growing. Situation is exacerbated by the fact that all countries, and primarily developing ones, are vulnerable to the risk of the malicious use of information and communication technologies for organizing and carrying out computer attacks, electronic espionage, personal data theft, criminal and terrorist activities, inciting color revolutions. And we believe that effective response to the wide range of threats, considering the pervasive and cross-border nature of ICTs, is only possible through the collective efforts of states. And Russia, like most UN member states, deems it a priority to ensure that these technologies are used exclusively for peaceful purposes and for the benefit of development. We are working together to bridge the digital gap and reduce the level of dependence on technological monopolies. We are striving for the strict observance in the information space of the key provisions of the UN Charter and norms of international law, primarily the principles of the sovereign equality of states and non-interference in their internal affairs. That's why we advocate for the formation of a fair and equitable system of international information security aimed at preventing conflicts in digital space and their peaceful settlements. A critical step in this direction was the adoption in December 24 by the UN General Assembly of the Convention Against Cybercrime, an initiative put forward some years ago by Russia. After years of intensive negotiations and with broad support from developing states, we managed to agree upon the first Universal International Treaty on International Information Security. In the coming days, the signing ceremony for the convention will take place in Hanoi, and we hope that as many countries as possible will participate in this event to ensure the swift entry into force of the document. We would encourage this. It will provide competent law enforcement agencies with an important tool to combat hackers and online fraudsters, as well as a platform for developing new mechanisms for multilateral interaction, including the exchange of electronic evidence. Worth mentioning that we are already launching work on a protocol concerning additional criminal offenses, such as the use of ICTs for terrorist and extremist purposes, illicit trafficking in arms and drugs, the propaganda of Nazi ideas, incitement of children to suicide, and other dangerous acts. The next step should be the development of similar international legal instruments focusing on the prevention and settlement of interstate conflicts. we proceed from the understanding that the substantive negotiations should be held within the UN, within the framework of a permanent mechanism on international information security, which will replace the open-ended working group on security of and in the use of ICTs, which concluded its work. And by the way, I would like to appreciate the work of the chairman of this group, Singapore ambassador in New York, Mr. Gafoor. Within this global mechanism, it is important to continue work on improving the existing practical tools for interstate interaction. This refers first and foremost to global intergovernmental points of contact directory to exchange information on computer attacks and incidents launched at the UN in 2024 and initiated by Russia. The directory has become the first universal confidence building instrument and tool in the field of international information security, enabling competent authorities of states to establish direct contacts in case of incidents in the information space. And we also support the relevant efforts of the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, and we are ready to continue working to improve these exercises and enhance their effectiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Indeed, states are interested and willing to engage, and all states are vulnerable. So I think the does require us to move together and leverage on things like the mechanisms and the convention, as well as confidence building tools like the directory. Let me move on to small and developing states, Tupotoa, including Fiji, Singapore, Pacific Islands. We are especially active in the UN discussions on cybersecurity and cybercrime, advocating for practical and concrete outcomes. From your viewpoint and from the viewpoint of other your neighbors in the Pacific Islands, for example, what are the key priorities and hopes of small and developing nations for the UN process, especially regarding international cooperation to address these new and emerging threats? And after that, I'll invite Alex, our representative from Timor-Leste.
Thank you, David. And firstly, just on behalf of the government and the people of Fiji, I'd like to bring warm greetings and thank you for the invitation to be here. I know when we last spoke, I think in a panel 2 years ago, we were still, in the UNOAWG sort of process, and the question you asked me there was, what are your thoughts? Is it, is multilateralism dead, or is there still, use for it? And the position that we have had then, still have now. And I think when you had asked me, I said I'm cautiously optimistic. So I smiled a little bit when you said that as well in the beginning. And I think for us, throughout that whole process, we've now completed it, and we now have the global mechanism that's going to be a permanent platform where we can further discuss these issues, where we need to have a lot more conversations and deepen common understanding amongst all states, and really increase and closer collaboration with multi-stakeholders to ensure that the solutions that we have are things that can be actioned on the ground. And the one thing that stands out for me is as long as there are digital have-nots, there will continue to be inequality, and we need to bridge that gap. And I think that's something that the UN processes, as the beating heart of multilateralism, really has that core role of bringing us all together, and that convening sort of platform where we all can speak. How do we make sure that that happens is the need to ensure that there's meaningful participation of all of the states, including, and I speak for those of us in the small island developing states, but we find a lot of value in being part of these UN processes. It's not easy, especially when we have smaller populations, smaller workforce. The travel is also something that we constantly have to also keep in mind. It takes, 2 days maybe to travel there, and then another 2 days to head back home, and then the meetings. But we found it very useful in the sense that we were able to engage, we were able to build trust, we were in a position to now contribute and help shape these global processes. And that's not something that was done previously. And we know this, as the discussions that we were having, the UN OEWG provided that platform. The UN Convention Against Cybercrime, it's the first in over 20 years, and Fiji was very happy to be part of that, to be part of those negotiations, to talk about the challenges that we have, and also how do we ensure that we're able to address it collectively. And so I think there definitely, our hopes are that we continue to do that, but given the threats that we're seeing, we need to do that faster. And we need to have more coordination. The good thing about in our final report that got adopted, the OEWG final report, it spoke about the need to ensure that we're able to, the modalities take into account small island developing states. And the fact that we need to arrange the meetings and the timings for the meetings, if it's going to be hybrid meetings and virtual meetings. So I think getting down to better understanding how can we ensure that members are not just present, but they can meaningfully participate, and you have the right people in the room and there's support given to all stakeholders to be in the room. I think that's critically important. And I think just, one of the question was, how do we address newer challenges? I think from our perspective, we haven't properly addressed threats that we already have. And the greatest threat that we have in our generation is climate change. And that's something that we've been talking about. We can't talk about cybersecurity without talking about digital transformation. We can't talk about digital transformation without talking about resilient infrastructure. And so climate resilient ICT infrastructure and ensuring that these conversations are embedded moving forward will be critically important for small island developing states, for countries. We see the impact of it. These threats, these challenges, including newer challenges, are things that we need to ensure that we discuss in our dedicated, thematic working groups and in other conversations that we're having. Also, the forums that we've, the processes that we've done under the UN Convention Against Cybercrime, that a lot of the members will be going to, obviously, after this as well. And so we're looking forward to that. I think we're cautiously hopeful, but we know that there's no, what is the alternative, I think, is the end point. We need to work together. We can't talk about global cooperation, and holistic and collective action without making sure that all of us are in the room. So I think we need to create those spaces, and we need to ensure that all of the relevant experts are in the room to be able to, so that policymaking can be informed, so that we can ensure that this is channeled down not just to the regions and across the regions, but down to the countries. And I think just on a final point, what Fiji is doing in terms of ensuring that this happens, we just launched our national digital strategy in April this year. We made sure that everything that we're talking about at the UN is mentioned in that. How are we operationalizing all of these commitments that we're making? We're currently in the process of launching our national cybersecurity and resilience strategy. We're in the final stages of that, but we're making sure that all of the CBMs we're talking about, all of the norms that we're talking about, how does that look like in Fiji's context? And I think that's something that if all of us are doing that's a great step forward.
Thanks so much, Dupo, again, for your cautious optimism. You were right. We did reach a consensus, and the urgency and the need to act and move. Alex, as representative of one of the newest countries in the world and soon to be the 11th member of ASEAN, what are your thoughts on the international cooperation front?
Well, thank you, David. It is for a privilege to contribute to this important discussion. Timor-Leste views these new UN processes as not as distant diplomatic exercises, but as essential frameworks for our national security and digital development. With regard to your question, you see, our key priority is inclusivity and accessibility. We hope these processes yield frameworks that are not only strong, but also supportive of nations at all stages of cyber capability development. We hope the global mechanism prioritizes confidence building measures and practical guidance formulated for developing states like ours, helping us fortify our critical infrastructure against emerging emerging challenges like AI-enabled attacks. For the Cybercrime Convention, our hope is for a clear, focused scope on core crimes to avoid over-criminalization, underpinned by robust human rights safeguards to ensure its effectiveness as a tool for justice and not an instrument for misuse. And furthermore, as you mentioned, as we become the 11th member of ASEAN, we see these UN processes as complementary to our regional commitments. Our fundamental hope is that they work in concert with the frameworks like the ASEAN Digital Master Plan to 2025 to create a cohesive global defense rather than a fragmented or exclusionary system. Thank you, David.
Thank you for that reminder of the need for inclusivity and accessibility. Giacomo, UNIDIR and other UN agencies have been actively partnering with states to strengthen resilience and to build capacity against especially newer and emerging threats such as AI. Could you share some of the newer initiatives underway in this space and how states, especially developing states, can better tap on UN expertise and programs to build their own national capabilities to address the threats? And then I'd like to invite Alex also to respond after Giacomo.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for the question, and thank you for having me on this panel. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here. I would like to start by saying that I think the United Nations has a very important role to play when it comes to capacity building. We know that the capacity building domain has many actors that are involved and many different levels of capacity building exist, but the UN and the importance of the UN cannot really be underestimated. And this is because the UN, in a way, is the vehicle through which we can make sure that these cyber capacity building programs are accessible to everyone. They are demand-driven and really highly contextualized and come with no strings attached, whether it's political, financial, or technological strings that come with it. So it's really important for the UN to be playing an active role in this context. But I've also realized that perhaps there is an issue there that is deriving from a potential lack of awareness of what the UN can do and can offer, or a potential lack of a single entry point that states can use to understand a little bit more how to approach the UN, which can feel like a very big and overwhelming organization. And I'm just going to use a very concrete example. There was a proposal in the context of the AWG that just finished. There was a proposal led by Latvia and Vietnam earlier this year to establish within UNIDIR, and was their idea, not ours, but we were very happy about it, to establish within UNIDIR a cyber resilience academy. Now, that proposal received a lot of support, especially from developing countries, but it came to the discussion a little bit too late to really be discussed with enough detail and time to be included in the final report. However, for us, it signaled exactly that. It signaled that within the community of member states, there is the need to have one place to go to and use that entry point. And we were quite receptive to that signal sent by member states. And even if that specific recommendation didn't find a place in the final report, we are currently working at UNIDIR to set up such a cyber resilience academy, such a platform, in time to make it available for the new global mechanism when it starts. So we're really hoping that by creating this entry point, we can facilitate how can state access these opportunities.
Thank you very much, Giacomo, especially on that reminder on the importance of the UN, the universality, as well as no strings attached. Alex, your views on this?
Yeah, thank you, David. We certainly agree with what Giacomo just said on the central role the UN plays in this. So we are very supportive of that, and we want to work very closely with the UN and other similar minded organizations. But I'd like to add also that we are, as you know, we are actively building our capacity, as evidenced by our participation in numerous regional initiatives, from ASEAN-led workshops to specialized trainings with partners like Japan, Australia, and the US. The challenge is moving from valuable but ad hoc participation to sustained strategic capability enhancing engagement. UN expertise can be the catalyst for this transition, we need support that is directly applicable to our stage of development. For example, model legislation drafting to fast-track our cybercrime law, specialized training for our investigators and judges on digital evidence, and strategic planning assistance for our national cybersecurity agency. More can be done to ensure this assistance is coordinated, demand-driven, and sustained. The new UN process should create a clear and predictable pathway for such support, moving from scattered workshops to long-term partnerships that directly address the unique challenges of small and developing states like ours. David.
Thank you very much. Let me move and shift gears a little bit about the conversation to cybersecurity and cybercrime. Tupo and Sergey, we're seeing an increasing convergence between cybersecurity and cybercrime issues. Yet both at the UN, as well as in many of our national systems, these are typically handled by different agencies for good operational or regulatory reasons. How might we foster stronger coordination between these domains at the national level and perhaps at the UN as well, so that we can have better holistic responses? Sergey.
Thank you, David. Thank you for this question, and my answer will be short. We believe that security has become a cross-cutting issue for many, if not all spheres of statehood. And different aspects of cybersecurity are normally handled by different agencies, as you said, in line with their jurisdictions across various states. The same principle historically applies to international negotiations, including at the UN. For instance, cybersecurity in the context of international security was discussed within the open-ended working group, and within its successor, it will be also discussed the UN Global Mechanism to be established in 2026. The criminal dimension of cybersecurity has been addressed by the Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime. It is important that these formats operate in synergy and in coordination, exchanging best practices and taking into account each other's achievements. At the same time, it's crucial to maintain the independence of both negotiation tracks, avoid duplication and overlapping in order to preserve effectiveness of these venues. Here, I would like to remind that both Ad Hoc Committee and Open-Ended Working Group produced breakthrough results by working in parallel. The UN Convention Against Cybercrime, as well as the establishment of this point of contacts directory and the permanent body on ICT security. So as Russia, we see that it's not time to merge everything that has cyber ICTs in its title, but to support and facilitate the well-functioning process we currently have. Thank you.
Thank you. So that good reminder of the need to coordinate to get the synergies where we can, but still not result in duplication. Tupo.
Thanks, David. And I think it's quite interesting because in the Pacific, it's the ministries that are looking after digital transformation, ICT, and communications are looking after cybersecurity, and we're also coordinating the in terms of cybercrime response. So it's a little bit different where we have the one ministry that wears a number of hats, and I think that's.
You're already coordinated.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but in the sense that we do have that sort of streamlined process where it doesn't sit in different agency. Obviously, we have other ministries of policing and defense that looks after core areas, but when that was also a challenge for us. So yes, the synergies were there. These were parallel processes. If we look at the UNOWG and if we look at the UN Convention Against Cybercrime negotiations that we were doing, that was happening, in Vienna and then in New York. And so for us, it was a little bit challenging, where we didn't have a lot of people that were covering both of these conventions. So it was literally trying to make sure that we were swapping, resourcing that we had, because we also need to do our national implementation of all these policies and everything. So, but it also shows the priority that we placed on these important global processes that were taking place, and the opportunity for us to be in a position where we help shape it and contribute to it. So how do we ensure that we continue this coordination and synergies? I think if you're talking about, from Fiji's perspective, one of the key things was making sure that the processes that we'll have and the modalities that we agree to will not be perfect, but it needs to be something that is informed by all of our contributions collectively, because there will need to be those compromise that needs to take place. I usually come in virtual meetings that happen at 11 p.m., 1 a.m. my time. That happens every day. That's not going to be okay. But if that happens, twice a month, that's fine. We can do that. So I think those practical discussions need to take place. But we can definitely talk about our experiences of how we've sort of done that. And I think at the end of the day, it's really ensuring that we have the right people in the room. And I think going back to Giacomo's point in terms of capacity building, the need for capacity building, we need to ensure that all member states are on an equal footing, and we have a deeper understanding of these cross-cutting discussions that are taking place. The Pacific, actually, at the UNOAWG submitted a working paper, and that was one of the first at sort of a regional level that we submitted on capacity building and what does capacity look like for the Pacific. And so I think making sure that all of these contributions that have been made by smaller states, by groups of states that have not been represented previously, and making sure that that's meaningfully incorporated in these global processes will be the way to ensure that these synergies happen moving forward.
Thank you very much, Tupo, for that reminder. Be careful what we wish for. If we want coordination, you end up with the same person doing many things. And 9 a.m. in New York is 9 p.m. in Singapore, and close to midnight in the Pacific. So I totally understand. We have run out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, I really apologize. We won't be able to take any questions from the audience, but I wanted to give respect to Giacomo and Larissa, give you 30 seconds each to round up any closing thoughts you might have. Giacomo, and then the last word to Larissa, please.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, I think if I had to pick one of the things to keep in mind is that the new mechanisms, the new instruments will definitely provide a new injection of a new drive for action, but we have to be realistic in what can be achieved in 5 or 10 days in New York. So I think it is important that we understand that those platforms can be catalyst for action, but we need sustained and persistent engagement throughout the year to make sure that we actually have impact. What I would like potentially to see is these instruments, these processes to be used as platforms that can launch specific initiatives to counter specific threats at the global level, whether it's ransomware or supply chain security. I think it's going to be a lot easier to transition from kind of diplomatic normative discussions to action if we do that on a threat-based approach.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. Larissa.
Thank you very much, David. Well, throughout this discussion, we have at some point made a counterpoint between diplomatic versus practical or actual oriented. So I do believe that diplomatic does not need to be a bad word, even though, of course, as a diplomat, I would say that. I do believe that these diplomatic processes, they really are the backbone that allows, that sustains more technical, more practical cooperation. And so this is why they are so important. And they go hand in hand. So they have created the conditions for more practical initiatives to take place. We very much hope to see those continue to grow as we go into the new mechanism, as we sign and hopefully see the convention entering into force very soon, as the convention itself is mostly comprised of very practical provisions. It creates, for instance, a 24/7 network that allows for very quick contact and cooperation between states regarding legal cooperation to investigate, prosecute cybercrimes. And as Giacomo, as Tupu mentioned before, capacity building is also a very important element of it. It is pretty much as practical as it can get, ensuring that we bridge those divides that still very much exist between countries' capacities in the digital arena in general, but in cybersecurity, sometimes even more so. And so it will be very important to see the global mechanism continue to foster the UN's role in capacity building. Giacomo mentioned its importance. We fully agree that that UN-led initiatives tend to be more effective. They are demand-driven. They don't carry political conditionalities, and so they will be essential for us to advance in cybersecurity, resilience, and in combating cybercrime.
Thank you very much for that comment, Larissa. It's a great reminder. I admit that, thank you for calling me out, because I have been framing it as a choice between the diplomatic versus the practical. So I accept it that it is indeed a false dichotomy, and it does. They lead and reinforce each other. So I accept that completely. And really, the panel has done an excellent job reminding us that the new UN processes have marked an important step in bringing forward global cooperation. And obviously, many of the speakers have had this consistent call for practicality and inclusiveness, the reminder that the UN is the inclusive platform without any conditions. And ultimately, the panel has reminded us that international cooperation is only as strong as trust, transparency, and the shared purpose which underpins all of this. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the panel for a wonderful session that we've had.
There we go.